Howdy, I'm Jace and I'm a sex addict. Every week I come on and answer questions with regard to my life as an addict or person in recovery, or somebody who's been on a journey the last few years to learn what it means to be sexually healthy and relationally healthy and now just plain old darn healthy. The question that came in this week is actually a really common misconception with sexual addiction, so I thought it would be a great one to address. Someone sent in an email talking about how they don't think they have sex addiction. They think maybe they have lust addiction because their acting out doesn't actually involve intercourse. Excuse me. And so that's a really understandable misconception about sex addiction, that sex addiction, one, is about sex, which it really isn't, and that you have to be actively having sex and a very particular kind of sex in order for it to be sex addiction, which is totally not true. Sex addiction shows up in the forms of fantasy, masturbation, pornography, voyeurism, exhibitionism, bestiality can fall in the mix as well. And then, of course, actual, physical sexual acts can be in there. A whole slew of things, honestly, that can fall under that same realm of sexual addiction, and that a lot of people that I'm familiar with in my own recovery and that I've read and talked to and everything, that, things that we struggle with, whether they deal with actual intercourse or sexual acts or not. Yeah, that's super confusing because it's sex addiction, so it should be about sex, and I get it. And it's one of the hardest things I have to explain to people, because even when I was in stages of anorexia, which is, the complete opposite side on the spectrum of active acting out, I was still a sex addict. And pornography has been a really big part of my addiction, and a lot of the times I wasn't interacting with anyone. In fact, I don't think I've ever watched porn with anybody. That was something I was doing alone. It was mixed with compulsive masturbation, which for me could be hours at a time, to a point of actually causing physical harm to myself. And it was not enjoyable. It wasn't like, oh, this is the coolest, let me keep going. I literally just could not stop. And it was really, it felt really embarrassing. It felt painful. It felt, just like draining. Watching pornography for hours is just like, ugh. Talk about feeling gross and just like brain dead. And, nobody else was there but me. And, voyeurism doesn't involve direct sexual contact, and exhibitionism doesn't either. And of course, all of these things can exist as well, and not be sexual addiction. I mean, if you're compulsively masturbating, you might want to look into it. If you're actually hurting yourself or you're missing work so that you can masturbate and you can watch pornography the way I was, you might want to talk to somebody. But a lot of the acts that can fall into a sexual addiction can be normal behavior as well. It just depends on if your life's unmanageable, if there are negative consequences that are clearly present, but you're still choosing to act out anyway. That can be problematic if it goes against, integrity or morals or values, and it's not something you want to be doing, but you're doing anyway. That's a good time to talk to somebody about it and see what's going on. So I don't know that there is lust addiction. In all of my research and my talk with all of my experts, I've never heard of lust addiction. I think that if there are still some of those addictive components to it, and it has to do with the sexual realm, even if that's just in, excessive fantasy or inappropriate fantasy or whatever it might be, that's still probably falling under that spectrum of sex addiction, and you can still receive treatment, which is the most exciting part. There are like countless things that fall under sex addiction, but they all have solutions, and they all have recovery in all sorts of different forms. There are different recovery groups. There's 12-step recovery. There are therapists who specialize in this in general. There are also just general therapists. There are trauma therapists. Like, there are so many different things that you can do personally and as groups as well. So, like, man, the world of sex addiction is quite dark. But people have been recovering it for decades. So it's not a world you're in alone, I can tell you that. It's one that has a solution. People have already done it, and they are happy to help you through it. And it can be free too. I hear that a lot, like, oh, recovery, costs so much money and going to a center costs thousands of dollars, or I don't have money for therapy. There are so many free groups and free resources. Um, yeah, nobody has to keep suffering with sex addiction or any addiction. One thing that recovering addicts are pretty good at, because we get like super jazzed. We're like, oh my God, my life is so amazing. I want everybody else to have this amazing life as well. I'm going to help them. And so a lot of people who are in recovery are happy to help new people who need to be in recovery, for their own reasons. So lust addiction, I've never come across that. I don't know if that's a thing. It's probably still falling under sex addiction as well, which is great because there's tons of resources. If anybody's interested in finding some quick resources on different groups or different websites, you can go to my website, suddenlycelibate.com, go to the sex addiction webpage, scroll all the way down, and you'll see, 20, 30 plus different resources that talk about sex and love addiction. And can point you in a good direction. And there's also books that are recommended on there that tackle these very specific things. There's so many people working in this field, and they're really awesome. And I've been lucky to meet several of them through my film, Suddenly Celibate, and I'm psyched. I am psyched. I'm not psyched for anyone to be an addict because it super sucks, but I'm super excited for people who want to be recovering addicts because it is, I almost said thebomb.com, and then I didn't, but then I just did. So that's what it is. It is thebomb.com, and welcome back to the 90s. Cool. That happened. So I'm going to not talk anymore so that nothing else weird comes out of my mouth. I always welcome your questions. You can send them in my website, suddenlycelibate.com. I will see you next week. And until then, stay curious.